For 200 years, the Old Mill has stood as a marker, a sentinel that guides both citizen and scholar. Today we'll learn the history, happenstances, and how this iconic building became a symbol of UVM and Vermont.
Good afternoon, and thanks for stopping by Across the Fence. I'm Keith Silva. The building, affectionately known as Old Mill on the UVM campus, stands at the center point of the UVM green, but its history and provenance, while well documented, is little known beyond the borders of the campus. Its story is one of multiple conflagrations, construction, and reconstruction. Our guest today knows this building like the back of his hand. Tom Visser is a UVM historic preservation professor, and in a prior life, he was the preservation consultant when Old Mill was remodeled in 95, 96. Welcome back to Across the Fence, Professor
Thank
Visser.
you very much. It's great to be here today.
I never thought to question why Old Mill is called Old Mill, but there's no water, no chase, no river, no nothing next to it. So how did it get its name?
Well, that's the irony. There it is on the top of the hill, but it was its shape, and it was made of brick. It looked like an old mill building in the mid-1800s.
Sure.
And so that's sort of when the students started to call it the mill, and then finally now, a century later, it's the Old Mill.
The Old Mill. Who is the architect, John Johnson?
Yeah, John Johnson was living in Burlington. His home was actually, he lived right on the UVM green, and he was a very astute and accomplished surveyor, master builder, architect. He designed Grassmount, for example. So he was the architect of the original college edifice that stood on the site where Old Mill stands today.
Right, right. And it did kind of look like a mill, and his specialty was building mills, so you get what you pay for.
Well, that's what it is. That's what it is, local bricks and so on.
What happens in May of 1824?
So the original college edifice, as it was known, which was a grand building, 165
on the
feet
screen
high,
here.
with a beautiful belfry, 46 rooms in there. I mean, this was the pride and joy of the upcoming town of Burlington, Vermont.
True.
Heavily subsidized by gifts from local donors, and then all of a sudden, fire breaks out. And the building was destroyed, and it was one of these heartbreaking events that it really hurt. It really hurt not only the university but the symbolism of Burlington. Nevertheless, shortly thereafter, the local citizens rallied together, and working with the few faculty there were at the university at the time, they started to raise funds to replace the building with a new one.
And they called on Mr.
They called
Johnson.
on John Johnson, who lived right next door.
Right next door.
And so he constructed, or his original plan, which these plans are at University of Vermont Special Collections. Instead of having one big building, he said, let's do three separate buildings that would be constructed in a row. So they started first on the so-called South College. And
we have a photo of that, so we'll bring that photo up. There we go. So I've put two arrows in here. So South College, that would be on the left.
As we're looking here, it's on the right.
Right. Yep.
And then North College was on the left, and then the one they built in the middle a few years later was so-called Middle College. With the Grand Dome.
Right. And so those two arrows represent, it's hard to see in this old picture, this drawing, but those were fire breaks. So Mr. Johnson learned from his first design. So there were breaks between the buildings, like little alleys almost.
Exactly.
That would have prevented fire from jumping from one building to the next. It just so happens while construction is going on in 1825, a prominent patriot is passing through town on a world tour, and he stops at Old Mill to literally lend a hand. Who is this patriot?
Well, it's the Marquis de Lafayette from France, the famous hero of the American Revolution. And here it comes, just right after the sort of the 50th anniversary of the start of the American Revolution. And so it was a grand patriotic display, and Lafayette had come to America to sort of celebrate that a bit earlier, but he wound his way up through New England and across Vermont, and so this was one of the stops on his grand tour.
Right place at the right time. Helped that he was also a Mason, so he could help with the laying of the cornerstone. Which is why there's also a Lafayette statue on the campus of the University of Vermont.
Well, it was the Masonic Order.
Oh, Masonic Order,
It was
yes,
the
sir.
Masonic Order.
Yes, sir.
So, but there is that connection.
Right. So let's fast forward to the 1830s. Old Mill gets a glow up, as they say nowadays. What happens to the building in the 1830s? Who comes along and helps out?
Well, but by the 1830s, what was going on is the decision was made to connect the building, and even by connecting it, still students had to go from the old South to the middle and so on. They had to go outside to connect. But by that time, we get this very, very long brick building there on the top of the hill. So it was about that time, tradition has it, that students began to call it the Mill.
The Mill.
And then over time, it became the Old Mill.
The Old Mill, right. And the big crowning achievement at this time is a dome. We saw it in that previous picture. And we actually have a photo that was from, that you found, a daguerreotype, you called this.
That's it is, from around 1845. One of the oldest photos that we have of Vermont. And, we see that dome, on the crest of the hill, looking down College Street, and indeed from the lake, it sort of was that crown, if you will, or right on the hill here in Burlington. Ultimately, the federal style of architecture gave way to what we refer to as the high Victorian style of architecture, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau Randall, an architect from Rutland, Vermont, designed a new facade. What's curious, though, and what's kind of fun about it, is that the rear of the building still has many of the bricks from the John Johnson era, and potentially even some of the bricks from the 1801 building or 1802 are still incorporated into the building. Everything you see from the College Green is from the 1880s.
Interesting. One of the things that's interesting that we were talking about before we started is the belfry. A lot of times referred to as a tower. It's not a tower. It was a belfry. It was open at one point, and there was actually a bell in there, the Holbrook Bell, which you can see right next to UVM, next to the Old Mill right now. So what was the purpose of this structure?
Well, of course, it's symbolic, but also had that bell to be rung for changing classes and so on.
That brings us to you and to how you brought this on. So you wrote an 82-page historic structural report that sort of guides the renovation. Talk about that work that you did, sir.
Well, this was a big project that I took on several years after I was hired by UVM, and it was a project that I did with one of our historic preservation graduate students, Mary Jo Llewellyn, who has gone on to a preservation career in Vermont as well. So it was as many of these research projects are, it was teamwork. Sort of tried to combine looking at the physical evidence, such as historic photos of what was there. Here we have an example of
a
student room from the 1880s or 1890s. Because the building had been renovated, it was in had serious structural issues. I remember at the time walking down the long hallways, and the analogy I often felt like it was like walking along a ship at sea, because the floors were kind of up and down and winding back and forth. And indeed, once the architects and engineers took a look at things, they realized that major structural work had to be done on the inside, which in essence would require gutting the entire historic building.
that photo we just saw of Old Mill with a white belfry.
Right.
You had to be around in the 90s to see that, but that was sort of what it was. It was just a painted white. Is there a reason it was white and not the color it is now? Is the color now the correct color?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the story goes that in the 1880s it was painted in the sort of the darker colors of the High Victorian Gothic, and then after that fire in the teens, as with many other buildings, it was repainted in the Colonial Revival style, which was sort of the white trim with the bricks. I mean, we see it on some of the other campus buildings also. So part of our research then was to try to figure out what were the original colors. So we took samples from the belfry and eaves and so on, and we were able to match those colors. And ultimately, the whole decision-making process on what to save, what to alter, and so on, came down to conversations with the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation, the State Preservation Office. The decision was made in consultation with the University Administration to restore the exterior of the building as close as possible to its 1880s appearance, and sort of in exchange, in mitigation for the loss of so much of the historic fabric from the inside.
You have been through every nook and cranny of this building. You've probably been around Old Mill and seen parts of it that no one will ever see or hadn't seen for hundreds of years. What surprised you in your research?
Well, I think, what was the layers. I think that was it more than anything else. We found evidence, indeed, going back to that early 1800s. We found evidence from the 1820s. We found evidence. It was just layers on layers on layers. I mean, we can see in this image here, I'm chatting there with the architects and engineers. After the sort of the floors have been taken out, and we just sort of have the walls.
The gutting.
It had been gutted, right? But I mean, there were layers of plaster, layers of paint on the plaster. Up in the attic, we found the old pews that had been in the old chapel that were there. So it was a virtual time capsule up there, especially on the top floor. So part of the project involved putting a major emphasis on restoring the inside of the John Dewey Lounge, as it was known, which had been the chapel.
Right. And now here it is, your work are completed.
Yeah, and with the outside paint scheme restored to that 1880s High Victorian Gothic palette.
Well, Tom, a fascinating look at Old Mill. I really appreciate all the time that you've taken. Thank you very much for talking with us. And my thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCX who helped me construct this grand edifice each and every day. I'm Keith Silva. This is Across the Fence. Thanks for being part of our family.